Okay, so good day for today. We're going to discuss about the third method of calculating deflections. Okay, so and this is using the conjugate beam method. Okay, so from previous videos, we had discussed about the double integration method and the area moment method. Okay, so this time for conjugate beam method, our objective is to uh, calculate for the deflection as well as the slope of the real beams by drawing its conjugate or corresponding conjugate beam. Okay. So as defined, so let us define first. The conjugate beam method is based on the analogy between the relationships among load, shear, and bending moment, and the relationships among the M over EI, the slope, and the deflection. Okay, the conjugate beam method is preferred by many engineers because of its systematic sign convention and straightforward application, which does not require sketching the elastic curve of the structure. So if you will recall, using the DIM or the area moment method, the first thing that we need to do is to draw the expected elastic curve or the deflected form of the beam. Because based from the elastic curve, we draw the deviations and the change in slope. Okay, so by drawing the tangent lines. So in this method, the conjugate beam method or the CBM method, we don't need to draw uh, the the deflected form or the elastic curve of the beam. Okay. So accordingly, the conjugate beam corresponding to the real beam. So again, the conjugate beam corresponding to the real beam is a fictitious beam with the same length as the real beam, but it is externally supported and internally connected such that if the conjugate beam is loaded with the M over EI diagram, so we need to draw here the moment diagram of the real beam, the shear and the bending moment at any point on the conjugate beam are equal respectively to the slope and deflection at the corresponding point on the real beam. So basically, uh, for this method, first we have to have the real beam. So ito yung actual beam with its actual loads. Okay? Then out of that real beam, we have to draw or produce its conjugate beam. Okay? Now, so how do we draw the conjugate beam? So we just simply copy the length. Okay, kung ano yung length ng real beam, kokopyahin mo lang, yun din yung magiging length ng conjugate beam natin, conjugate beam natin. Tapos, from the real beam, we have to draw the moment diagram. Okay, so remember yung ginagawa nating moment diagram by parts using the area moment method. So yung moment diagram na yon from of the real beam, ita-transfer natin or kokopyahin natin dun sa conjugate beam at gagawin natin siyang magiging load ng conjugate beam. Okay? So basta yung area ng moment diagram is nasa taas, okay, that means positive yung moments. Paglipat mo sa conjugate beam, the direction of that equivalent load would be upward. So, yung mga negative moment diagrams naman dun sa real beam, pag tinransfer mo sa conjugate beam, it would be a load on the conjugate beam which is directed downward naman. Okay? So basically, pagka inilagay mo yung moment diagram dun sa conjugate beam, the loads would be directed away. Kung nasa ibabaw, upward. Pagka nasa ilalim, it would be downward. It would be away from the axis of the conjugate beam. Tapos, if we want to solve for the slope and the deflection of the real beam, so that will just correspond to the shear and the moment of the conjugate beam. So, ibig sabihin, after mo ma-produce yung conjugate beam, mailagay mo sa kanya yung moment diagram and it will act as its moment, its load. i-analyze natin ngayon yung conjugate beam due to that moment diagram as loads. Then, at any points doon sa conjugate beam, pagka na-solve mo yung shear force doon, yung shear force sa conjugate beam will correspond to the slope of the real beam. And likewise, yung magiging moment doon sa conjugate beam will correspond to the deflection on the real beam. So, ganun yung interrelation between the real beam and the conjugate beam. Okay? So I have here the comparison or the conversion of the real beam to its conjugate beam. So basically, it will be depending at any given joints, basically, or on the supports. Okay? So let us recall that for a hinge support or a roller support, diba meron siyang reaction. So pagka-hinge, diba dalawa yung reaction natin dyan, horizontal tsaka vertical. Pagka-roller, isa lang yung reaction. So meaning to say, whenever we have a simple end support, which is a hinge or it could be a roller, diba ang slope doon is hindi equal to 0? The slope there would be non-zero. Meaning to say, if I'll draw the elastic curve of that beam, due to that simple support, the elastic curve would be something like this, diba? The elastic curve would be simple like this. So if I'll draw a tangent line at that point, the tangent line would be something like this, and meron siyang angle or theta or slope with respect to the horizontal. So that means yung theta hindi siya equal to 0. Likewise, kapag ka-roller support din, kapag ka nag-draw ako ng tangent line doon sa elastic curve niya, yung tangent line natin, ganito itsura. So meron siyang angle with respect to the horizontal. Yun yung theta or yun yung slope, which is obviously hindi siya equal to 0. Okay? So, and at the same time, how about deflection? So in terms of deflection naman, alam naman natin na pagka-hinge tsaka roller, walang magiging deflection at that joint. Diba? Hindi naman siya gagalaw up or down. It will remain at the same point before and after loading. So therefore, the deflection at that point for hinge or roller would be 0. Okay? So ito yung kailangan nating malaman sa real beam. Kailangan malaman natin yung slope at saka deflection. Okay? Now, kung ang slope is not equal to 0, when we draw the conjugate beam or when we identify the corresponding conjugate beam, diba sabi natin, yung slope sa real beam will correspond to the shear on the conjugate beam, while the deflection or the delta on the real beam will correspond to the moment on the conjugate beam. So, ito yung shear, ito yung moment. Since 0 ang shear, 0 ang slope, kaya ginawa ko na rin 0. Again, since yung theta natin is not equal to 0, kaya yung corresponding shear would not be equal to 0 also. Since the deflection is equal to 0, it will correspond that the moment on the conjugate beam would be 0. Okay? So now, paano natin ma-identify yung conjugate beam? So anong klaseng support, anong klaseng joint na kung saan ang shear natin is hindi 0, pero yung moment natin would be 0. Okay? So anong klaseng joint or anong klaseng support na kung saan ang shear doon ay hindi 0, pero ang moment doon ay 0. Hindi ba simple support din yun? Kasi ang simple support, walang moment. Diba? The moment there is 0, tama. And at the same time, may shear force. May shear force, yun yung reaction, yun yung shear force. So ibig sabihin, kapag ka-hinge or roller ang nasa real beam, ang corresponding conjugate beam niyan would be the same lang. Roller or hinge din. Okay? Now, so let's consider the second example. For the second example, it is a fixed support. So, okay. Fixed support. So, ano ang theta ng fixed support? Diba ang theta pagka fixed support? 0. Diba? Tapos, ang deflection dyan kapag fixed support is also 0. So, ito yun actually. Yan yun. Now, pagka drawing natin ng conjugate beam niya, so, yung theta correspond to the slope. Tapos yung delta corresponds to the moment of the conjugate beam. Since parehas silang 0, 0, so 0, 0 din to. Now, ano? Okay, mag-isip tayo ngayon. Anong klaseng joint? Okay, anong klaseng joint na kung saan ang shear doon is 0 at ang moment doon ay 0? Ibig sabihin, walang shear force, walang moment. Hindi ba't free end yon? Kasi at the free end, alam natin, walang shear force sa dulo, wala ring moment. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, kapag ka-fixed support ang real beam mo, ang magiging corresponding conjugate beam niya would be a free end. So, ganun ang pag-identify ng conjugate beam given yung real beam. Okay, o pangatlo, example. What about kapag yung real beam mo is free end? Okay, o free end, ito yung point. 'Di ba? Anong kailangan natin alamin para sa real beam? Yung slope at saka deflection. Okay, slope at saka deflection. Ano ang slope dun sa free end? 'Di ba pagka nag-deflect yan, ganito yung elastic curve niyan pagka free end, so lumulundo siya, no? So pagka nag-drawing ako ng tangent line at that point, with respect to horizontal, meron tayong theta. Hindi siya equal to 0. Kaya theta is not equal to 0. Actually, ito yun. Okay? Tapos, alam natin na kapag free end, pagka niloadan yan, lumulundo yan, nagkakaroon siya ng deflection, delta. Therefore, ang delta natin is hindi rin equal to 0. So, which is ito yun. Okay? So, kung yung slope at saka deflection mo ng real beam are hindi equal to 0, correspondingly, it would be for the conjugate beam, again, yung slope corresponds to the shear, tapos yung deflection will corresponds to the moment. Since parehas hindi sila 0, parehas din magiging hindi 0 yung shear at saka moment. Now, tanong, anong klaseng joint ang hindi 0 ang shear at hindi rin 0 ang moment? Ibig sabihin, may value ang shear, may value ang moment. Hindi ba fixed support 'yon? 'Di ba? Kasi sabi natin, ang fixed support, merong shear at meron ding moment. So, ibig sabihin, ito yung non-zero shear at saka non-zero moment. So, ibig sabihin, whenever you have a free end in your real beam, the corresponding conjugate beam of the free end would be a fixed support. Okay? So, ganun ang pag-identify ng conjugate beam. Iisa-isahin mo lahat ng mga joints sa real beam. Iisa-isahin mo lahat ng joints sa real beam. Kasi ko-convert mo yung mga joints from real beam to its corresponding conjugate beam, yung joint sa conjugate beam. Okay? So, ganun ang pag-convert. Okay. So, let's have next example. What if I have here a simple interior support? Interior support, halimbawa meron kang continuous beam. Halimbawa, ganyan. Ganyan. So, sabihin, that is a continuous beam with two spans. Ito exterior support. Ito rin exterior. Yung nasa dulo, exterior. So, ito yung interior support. Yung nasa gitna. Okay. So, whenever you have an interior support, it could be a simple interior hinge or it could be an interior roller. Okay. Diba, pagka nagkaroon ng deflection dyan, so, kunwari, ito yung elastic curve. So, pwedeng maging ganyan. Ayan. So, if this would be the interior support, if I'll draw a tangent line dyan, the tangent line would be, it will not be horizontal, diba? Kasi kapag, halimbawa, yung load dito, mas malaki kaysa sa load dito. So, ang tangent line niya would be ganyan. So, with respect to horizontal, may theta. So, therefore, theta rito is hindi equal to 0. Ito yon. Okay? At the same time, diba, when we cut the section at this interior support, when we cut the member at the interior support, diba may moment na lumalabas doon? Axial, shear, tsaka moment. Okay? So at the same time, when it comes pala doon sa deflection, deflection. Diba since this is an interior support, so alam naman natin that the deflection there would be equal to 0. Ang deflection doon equal to 0 kasi hindi naman siya gagalaw baba or taas, diba? Okay, so theta is hindi 0, pero ang deflection doon ay 0. Again, yung theta, pagdating sa conjugate beam, will correspond to the shear. So kung hindi siya 0, it follows that the shear is also not equal to 0. So ito yun. Kapag yung deflection mo ay 0, pagdating sa conjugate beam, it will correspond to the moment. Okay? So, 0 si deflection sa real beam. So, that means 0 ang moment sa conjugate beam. Ito yun. Now, so mag-isip tayo ng joint. Anong mangyayari doon sa joint na yon na kung saan ang shear natin ay hindi 0. Ito yon. Pero at that joint, ang moment there is 0. So, anong klaseng joint yon? Hindi ba't internal hinge yon? Di ba alam natin na pagka internal hinge, may shear force dyan. Di ba? When you cut the section at that point, may shear force na lalabas doon. Pero walang moment. The moment there is 0 kasi may internal hinge nga. So, ibig sabihin, if you find an interior support on the real beam, kapag ka-convert mo yan sa conjugate beam, the interior support will be converted to an internal hinge. So, yun yung equivalent conjugate niya. Okay? So, last. How about for an internal hinge? What if you have a real beam na mayroong internal hinge within its span? So, ano bang property na internal hinge? In terms of slope, hindi naman 0 yon, diba? Kasi nagkakaroon ng deflection. Let's say, originally, horizontal yung beam. Pagkatapos ng loading, ito na internal hinge. So, when I draw a tangent line there, with respect to horizontal, so yung theta doon will not be equal to 0. The slope there is not equal to 0. So, ito yon. Tapos, yung deflection din doon, hindi naman 0 kasi pwede lumundo yun eh. Diba? Nagde-deflect din yun eh. So, deflection there is also hindi equal to 0. Okay? So, parehas yung slope at saka yung delta are not equal to 0. So, if we will identify its conjugate beam, again, the slope corresponds to the shear and the deflection corresponds to the moment. So, since parehas sila hindi equal to 0, the shear and the moment will not be equal to 0 also. Okay, now, isip tayo. Anong klaseng joint ang pwede nating maiisip na kung saan ang shear force daw doon ay hindi 0 at saka yung moment daw doon ay hindi 0. Ibig sabihin, may shear force value, may moment value. Anong klaseng joint yun? Diba, interior support dapat yun? Kasi sa interior support, when we cut the section there, may shear force, at the same time, may moment. Okay, so which is similar to this two shear and moment conditions which are both not equal to 0. Okay, so ganun ang pag-identify ng conjugate beam. Okay, so again, to summarize it up, so titingin ka sa real beam. Okay, yung real beam, yan yung given na beam. No? Yung totoong beam na ina-analyze natin. So, i-identify mo lang yung slope at saka yung deflection ng real beam. Okay, pag na-identify mo na kung ano ang slope, ano ang deflection ng real beam, okay, so kaya mo na ma-drawing or ma-produce yung corresponding conjugate beam nila. How? How? So, ang theorem is that yung slope ng real beam corresponds to the shear of the conjugate beam. Tapos yung deflection ng real beam will correspond to the moment of the conjugate beam. Okay, so yan yung tatandaan nyo. Slope deflection na real beam corresponds the shear moment ng conjugate beam. Okay? Okay, so let us have an example. Okay, for the sign convention, if the positive ordinates of the moment diagram are applied to the conjugate beam, okay, as upward loads, again, so yung mga positive ordinates ng moment diagram are to be applied on the conjugate beam as upward load. Okay? Then vice versa, then the positive shear in the conjugate beam denotes a positive counterclockwise slope of the real beam. So the same sign convention pa rin, no? So pagka nakuha natin is ang sign convention, ang sign ng shear sa conjugate beam is positive, 'di ba? So ibig sabihin pagka positive shear sa conjugate beam, so that means positive din yung slope. No? Kapag nakuha nating moment sa conjugate beam is positive, that means positive din yung deflection. Deflection or delta. Tawagin natin delta. Okay? So, yung sign convention natin sa area moment method will still remain dito sa conjugate beam. Ano yung sign convention natin sa area moment method? Diba, in terms of change of slope, would be positive kapag counterclockwise, negative pagka clockwise. Sa deflection naman, it would be positive kapag positive means yun. A positive bending moment in the conjugate beam denotes a positive upward. Okay, so upward deflection. And if it's negative, it will be downward. Okay, so yan yung magiging sign convention natin later on. Okay, so let's have an so I have here the procedures in the analysis of beam using conjugate beam. Okay, so let us just apply these procedures in the succeeding examples para mas ma-appreciate natin. Okay, so let's have this case naman. So I'll be giving you the real beam. We will identify its corresponding beam. Okay, so one. So I have here a simple beam. So this would be my real beam. Yung real beam, yan yung actual beam na i-analyze natin. Okay. So ang pag-a-analyze natin is per joint. Okay, so let's start with this joint. Okay, so let's have the theta and the deflection. Okay, this is hinge na nasa dulo. Hinge na nasa dulo. So that means ang slope doon ay hindi equal to 0, di ba? Hindi yan equal to 0. Tapos yung deflection doon ay 0. Tama? Okay? Now, how about dito sa roller sa dulo, sa kanang kabilang dulo? Anong slope dito? Di ba ang slope doon hindi equal din sa 0? Ibig sabihin may value yung slope dyan, di ba? Tapos yung deflection dito, 0. Okay? Now, so pagka nag-drawing tayo ng conjugate beam, kokopyahin natin yung length. So kung halimbawa yung length nito is L, so kokopyahin ko rin yung length. So yan, so length L din. Now, eto sa point na to, sa kaliwang dulo, ano dapat ang condition ko ng kaliwang dulo in such a way na, di ba yung slope at saka deflection sa real beam will correspond to the shear tsaka moment. Oh. Slope dito ay hindi 0. So dapat ang shear dito ay hindi rin daw 0. Kung ang deflection dito 0, so dapat ang moment dito 0. Oh, anong klaseng joint dapat meron dito para na kung saan ang moment daw doon 0, tapos ang shear daw doon ay hindi 0. So anong klaseng support 'yon? Hindi ba that would be a hinge din? Kasi ang hinge, 'di ba, mayroon siyang reaction. Yung reaction na yan, that will correspond to the shear. So non-zero siya. Pero ang moment that at that point would be 0. Okay? So that would be the conjugate equivalent of the left support. Now, how about dun sa right, extreme right support? So sabi sa real beam, ang theta raw is hindi 0. So kung theta, it will correspond that the shear ay hindi rin equal to 0. Tapos yung deflection daw equal to 0. So sa conjugate beam, that means yung moment equal to 0. So again, anong klaseng joint ang meron dapat dito para ang moment daw doon is 0, tapos yung shear daw doon ay hindi 0? Okay, so what kind of support? Hindi ba it could be hinge or roller? Kasi pagka hinge at saka roller, 'di ba? Meron siyang shear pero wala siyang moment. So that means the real beam was given. Out of that real beam given, I come up with its equivalent conjugate beam. So basically to sum it up, kapag ka simple beam ang real beam mo, ang corresponding conjugate beam niyan ay parehas lang, no? So basta simple beam, ang real beam at conjugate beam niya would be the same. Okay. Next. What about for a cantilever beam? Okay, cantilever beam. Ito yung real beam, cantilever beam. So slope, deflection. Okay, at this joint, what is its slope? Diba ang slope doon is equal to 0? Diba? Pagka fixed support. Okay. what is its deflection at this point? Diba pagka fixed support, the deflection is also equal to 0? Tama? Okay. Now, what about on the far end, sa dulo, sa kanan? Anong slope dito? Diba ang slope dito ay hindi 0? Kasi, diba, ano yan magde-deflect yan downward. So, if I draw a tangent line at the deflected point, the tangent line would be hindi 0. I mean, the tangent line will create an angle with respect to horizontal. So, that means the slope there or theta there is not equal to 0. How about the deflection? Diba ang deflection dito, hindi rin 0? Actually, the deflection at the free end would be maximum. So, hindi siya 0. Ayan. So, again, paano ko i-drawing ang conjugate beam niyan? So, kokopyahin ko lang yung length. So, halimbawa, this is length L. So, kokopyahin ko lang din yung length L. Tapos, at this joint, diba, sa conjugate beam, shear, at saka moment. Okay. Kopyahin ko. So, ang theta rito 0, ang deflection dito 0. So, shear 0, moment 0. Okay, tanong. Anong klaseng joint ang 0 ang shear, tapos 0 ang moment? Anong klaseng joint yon? 0 ang shear, 0 ang moment. Diba free end? Diba ang free end? Diba? Ang free end, ang shear doon ay 0 kasi wala namang load doon or wala namang support reaction doon. At the same time, ang moment doon ay 0 din. Okay? Now, what about doon sa dulong kanan na dulo? Dulong kanan na point. Okay, so ang shear daw dapat dito is hindi 0. Tapos yung moment dito ay hindi rin 0. So based from the real beam, no? Oh, anong klaseng joint or support ang ilalagay natin dito na kung saan daw ay merong shear at merong moment. Merong shear tsaka merong moment. Hindi ba fixed support yung ganon? Diba? Ang fixed support kasi may shear tsaka may moment. Oh, okay, so it satisfies the condition. So, ibig sabihin, whenever you have a cantilever beam, fixed, free, the conjugate beam would be a cantilever beam din, kaya lang magiging free, fixed. Mababaligtad yung supports. Fixed, free yung real beam. Pagdating na conjugate beam, it would be free, fixed. Okay? So, next example, letter C. Okay, for letter C. So, I have here a simple beam with overhang. Okay, so di bali tatlo yung joints niyan, di ba? Joint 1, ito yung free end. Joint 2, yung roller. Roller is an interior roller. Tapos yung hinge natin is an exterior, nasa dulo. Okay, so tatlo yung identify natin. So again, sa real beam, kailangan natin malaman yung slope tsaka deflection. Okay, sa point yung unang point, anong slope dito? Di ba hindi equal to 0 dito? Deflection din dito ay hindi equal to 0. Okay. So, pagka nag-drawing ako ng conjugate beam, kokopyahin ko lang din. So, kung kunwari ito ay L1, ito ay L2. So, ito rin ay L1, ito rin yung L2. So, these are the points. Point 1, point 2, and we have point 3. Okay. For the point 1, diba sa conjugate beam, it would be shear, tsaka moment. 0, not 0, not 0. So, not 0, not 0, not 0. Okay. Anong klaseng joint to? Na kung saan not 0 ang shear, not 0 din yung moment. Ibig sabihin may values yung shear, may values yung moment. Anong klaseng support yon? Okay, so fixed support, diba? So gagawin ko tong fixed support. Fixed support, ayan. Okay, pangalawang point dito. Ano ang slope dito? Diba ang slope dito ay hindi 0 kasi interior roller support yan eh. Ang moment din dyan ay hindi rin 0. Tama ba? Yes. Okay, so ang slope dun sa interior roller, hindi 0. At the same time, yung deflection would be 0. Okay. So the deflection there, it should be it should be 0. So this is 0. Kasi interior roller. So walang deflection naman doon, 'di ba? Okay? So So that corresponds here, okay? Yung shear hindi 0, pero yung moment dito must be 0. Galing dito sa dalawang to. Okay? So, tanong, anong gagawin ko sa point na to para maging 0 yung moment, pero may shear force? Anong gagawin ko sa support na to? 0 yung moment, pero may shear force. So, anong klaseng joint yun? Diba internal hinge yun? Internal hinge. So, this would be an internal hinge. Diba ang internal hinge, may shear force doon, pero pagka kinat mo yung section, the moment there would be 0. Okay? Okay, so yung last joint naman dito, anong slope dito? The slope here is hindi 0, pero ang deflection dito ay 0. Okay, so slope hindi 0, pero ang moment 0. So anong klaseng joint to? Yung pangatlo sa dulo sa kanan. Wala raw moment, pero may shear force. So that would be a roller or a hinge. Parehas lang naman, roller or a hinge. Diba pagka ang roller, may shear force siya due to the reaction, pero the moment there is 0. So, ibig sabihin, the conjugate, if this is the real beam, yung nasa kaliwa, the corresponding conjugate beam of that real beam would be yung nasa kanan. Yung nasa kanan. Okay, so fix, internal hinge, tapos roller or hinge dun sa kanan. So, that would be the corresponding conjugate beam. Okay? Next, example. Okay. So, let's have this real beam. Okay. Slope, deflection. Pagka fixed support, slope 0, deflection 0, diba? Okay. Drawing na natin conjugate beam. Isa-isa. Kokopyahin ko yung length niya, kung ano yung haba nito. Kunwari L1, kunwari L2. So, L1, L2 rin. Same lang. Kopyahin mo lang yung length. So, anong gagawin ko sa point na to? Para 0, 0 yung slope deflection na real beam corresponds to the shear tsaka moment. So, shear is 0, moment is also equal to 0. So, that is a free end. Okay, so this is free end. Free end. Okay, next. If this is an internal hinge, this is an internal hinge, anong slope doon? Di ba pagka internal hinge, ang slope doon ay hindi 0. Okay, so yung deflection din doon ay hindi 0. So, ibig sabihin, yung slope at saka deflection sa isang internal hinge ay hindi equal to 0 parehas. So, pagka din-drawing ko yung sa point na to, so yung shear daw hindi equal to 0, tapos yung moment daw hindi rin equal to 0. Anong klaseng support yun? Anong ilalagay ko dun sa joint na yon para pagka kinat ko yung section, may shear na lalabas, may moment na lalabas. And they are both not equal to 0. Eh di maglagay ako ng internal roller, sa interior support. Maglagay ako ng pwedeng roller, pwedeng hinge. Interior support. 'Di ba pagka may interior support, kinat mo yung member at that point, 'di ba may lumalabas na shear force at meron ding may moment magnitude. So they are both not equal to 0. So yan yung shear and moment not equal to 0. Okay, for the last point dito, ano ito? Anong slope dito? Ibang slope dyan, hindi equal to 0. Pero ang deflection doon, 0. Okay? So pagdating dito sa conjugate beam, yung slope not equal to 0 corresponds to the shear. Deflection equal to 0 corresponds to the moment. Anong klaseng joint ang ilalagay ko rito or support para yung shear ko daw ay hindi 0, pero ang moment ko down ay 0. Eh, di ba dulo siya? So, pwede ako maglagay dyan ng hinge or roller. Hinge or roller. Diba? Pagka hinge, may reaction and that corresponds to the shear force. Hindi 0. Tapos yung moment yan, dahil sa dulo siya, this 0 yung dyan. So as you can see, the conjugate beam is a free end, interior support, tapos hinge sa dulo. So that is the conjugate beam of the real beam. Now, pagka dinodrawing nyo yung conjugate beam, huwag kayo masyadong minsan magugulat kayo parang ang pangit ng itsura or actually minsan unstable. So walang problema 'yon, no? So hindi kailangan maging stable or determinate ang conjugate beam. Hindi necessarily kailangan maging stable or even determinate ang conjugate beam. Sorry. Hindi kailangan maging stable yung conjugate beam. Okay? So, and most of the conjugate beam should be determinate kasi pagka hindi siya determinate, we cannot solve for the beam. Okay? So, dapat determinate din siya. Okay? Pero yung stability, wag ka na mag-alala doon na it seems like hindi siya stable. Nangyayari rin 'yon. Okay? O, next. Letter D. So, letter E. Okay, for letter E, given sa left side yung real beam. So we have four joints to consider. Joint 1, joint 2, joint 3, joint 4. Okay. Slope, deflection. So ganun lagi, no? Slope, deflection. So sa joint 1, slope is not 0, but deflection is 0. Diba? Joint 1. Oh, okay, so i-drawing natin yung conjugate beam. Isa-isahin natin. Okay, so shear moment. Okay, so not 0, at saka 0. O, anong klaseng joint to? May shear pero walang moment. May shear pero walang moment. That is, it could be hinge support. Ayan. Diba? May shear force pero walang moment yan. Next, internal hinge. O, pagka internal hinge, slope, hindi 0 din. Deflection, hindi rin 0. Diba? Okay? So, slope and deflection are not equal to 0 pagka internal hinge. So, pagdating sa conjugate beam, kunwari, ito yung point na yon, ang shear hindi raw 0, yung moment hindi raw 0. So, anong klaseng point yun? Yung shear force, hindi 0. Yung moment, hindi rin 0. Ibig sabihin, may value sila parehas. And that would be an interior support. Diba? Ang interior support, pagka kinat mo yung member doon, meron siyang shear, meron ding moment. So, they're not both equal to 0. Next, yung roller naman. Dito tayo sa interior roller support. Interior roller support sa real beam. So, the slope there is not 0, but the deflection there is 0. Okay, so pagdating dito sa conjugate beam, the shear, hindi 0, pero yung moment, 0. O, anong klaseng joint yun? Internal hinge, di ba? So we will put an internal hinge there. Kasi on an internal hinge, pag kinat mo internal hinge, may shear force, pero walang moment. Okay? Last, roller exterior support. Slope, not 0, but deflection is 0. Okay? So pagdating sa conjugate beam, ang shear not 0, ang moment 0. So anong klaseng support yan? May shear pero walang moment. So it could be an external roller or hinge. Diba? May shear dyan pero walang moment. So that means yung left side na real beam, we come up with our conjugate beam. Okay? So yung ibang estudyante ang ginagawa, mini-memorize nila. Kapag ganito yung beam, ganito dapat ang itsura ng conjugate beam. Pag ganito yung beam, 'di ba? So actually pwede mong i-memorize 'yon, pero ang hirap mag-memorize. So dapat ang tandaan mo kung paano siya na-drawing yung conjugate beam. Basta ang tandaan mo lang, pagka sa real beam, i-identify mo lang yung slope, deflection. Slope, deflection ng real beam will correspond to the shear at saka moment ng conjugate beam. Okay? So letter F example. Oh, may dalawang joints tayo, isa tsaka dalawa. Okay. So ang slope dito 0, deflection din dito 0 kasi parehas silang fixed support kasi sila, fixed support. So pag dinrawing ko yung conjugate beam ko dyan, shear 0, moment 0. So that is a free end. Diba? Free end yun. Dito naman sa roller, exterior end support, the slope there is hindi 0, although ang deflection doon ay 0. So sa kabilang dulo, ano dapat ang ito in such a way na yung shear daw ay hindi 0, pero ang moment ko doon would be 0. Diba? That would be a hinge support. Okay? May shear pero walang moment. Pansinin mo yung conjugate beam. Ano itsura ng conjugate beam? Diba? Parang isang member tapos may hinge sa dulo. Tapos overhang yung dulo. Diba? Unstable yan? Unstable yan, diba? So yan yung sinasabi ko. Ang conjugate beam, not necessarily it would be stable. No? Sa real beam, kailangan i-check mo na stable dapat sila. Yung real beam yan eh. Pero pagka dinrawing mo yung conjugate beam, don't be surprised kapag yung lumalabas na itsura ng conjugate beam would be a unstable one. Okay? Bakit? Kasi pagka niload natin yung moment diagram dyan mamaya, that will make it stable. That will make it in equilibrium. Okay? So kasi these are parang virtual lang eh. Kumbaga hindi naman siya talagang totoong physical beam, yung conjugate beam. So conjugate beam are just there for us to analyze and solve for the slope and deflection of the real beam. Okay, so how about for this real beam? Oh, ang tawag dyan sa beam na yan, both ends fixed. Ang tawag dyan ay restrained beam. O pagka restrained beam, fixed. Diba? Fixed. So slope, 0. Deflection, 0. So pagka conjugate beam yan, hindi kopyahin ko lang yung haba niya, ay nasa left ko. So shear, 0. Moment, 0. Eh di free end. Diba? Free end siya. Okay, how about dun sa kanan na fixed support uli? Again, di ba sa fixed support, slope uli ay 0, deflection doon ay 0 rin. So dito sa kabilang dulo ng conjugate beam, shear 0, moment 0. So anong klaseng joint yun? E di free end din. So that's it. Di ba? Kung L yan, pares lang na yung haba. Kopyahin mo lang yung haba niyan. Yan yung corresponding conjugate beam ng restrained beam. O pansinin mo, ang conjugate beam natin dito walang support, nakalutang. No? So that's possible. Okay, so nakalutang lang yung conjugate beam natin. Okay, so yan yung pagkuha ng conjugate beam. How about this one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5. Again, slope, deflection. Sa taas ilalagay ko slope. Hindi equal to 0. 0. Hindi equal to 0. 0. Not 0. 0. Not 0. 0. Ito, not 0. 0. So yan yung mga slope and deflection at those joints. Okay, so pag dinrawing ko yan, okay, so sa unang hinge, sabihin natin shear moment. Oh. So ang shear nila dapat may values lahat kasi ang slope nila are non-zero lahat. So it corresponds that the shear must not be equal to 0. Tapos yung deflection naman nila lahat sila 0. So it will correspond sa conjugate beam, the moment would be 0. Okay. At this point, ano ang 0 moment pero may shear? E di hinge support or roller support, diba? Dulo naman siya eh. Pagka nasa dulo naman siya, so that is a moment equal to 0. Okay. So ito yung sa joint 1 joint 1. Joint 2, tawagin kong joint 3, joint 4, joint 5. Okay. Sa joint 2, ano yun? Ano ilalagay ko sa joint 2 para may shear pero walang moment? The internal hinge, diba? Ang internal hinge, may shear force pero walang moment. When you cut the member at the internal hinge, may shear force lumalabas pero walang moment. So internal hinge. Sa joint 3, ganun din. Joint 3, internal hinge ulit. Joint 3. Joint 4, ganun ulit. Internal hinge ulit. Joint 4. Joint 5. Joint 5, okay, so pwedeng hinge, pwedeng roller support. Okay, so yan yung magiging conjugate beam. ng letter H ng real beam. Para siyang simple beam na meron tatlong internal hinges dun sa loob ng span niya. Okay? How about for this letter I? Again, slope, deflection. Okay? Not 0, 0. Dito sa internal hinge, the slope there is not 0. Deflection there is not 0, 0 also, diba? Dito sa roller, not 0, 0. Okay? So pag dinrawing ko yung conjugate beam, shear moment. Dito daw, not 0, pero 0 yung moment. Ano to? Hinge. Diba? Exterior support. So it could be a hinge support. Okay, dito, not 0 sa internal hinge sa real beam. Pagdating sa conjugate beam, ano ang ilalagay ko rito para maging non-zero ang parehas shear and moment? The interior support. Diba? On an interior support, pagka kinat ko yung beam doon, mayroong shear force na lalabas at may moment. So they're not both equal to 0. Then lastly, slope is not equal to 0, pero ang moment there is 0. So that would be a roller or a hinge. Pwede rin. Baka kasi may shear, pero moment there is 0. So yan yung magiging corresponding conjugate beam nung given real beam sa letter I. Meron pa ba? Okay, so this one. So ganun ulit, no? Slope, deflection. Fixed support, 0, 0. Internal hinge, not 0. Deflection, not 0. Free end, not 0 slope, not 0 din ang deflection. So pag dinrawing ko yung conjugate beam niyan, this would be free end kasi shear moment. Okay, so 0, 0. So free end. Dito, not 0 din yung moment. So anong klaseng support yun? It would be an interior support. Yan. Tapos sa dulo, kanan, free end. So ano dapat na meron tayo dito para maging non-zero yung shear, non-zero din yung moment. Eh, di gawin kong fixed support. Diba? Ang fixed support, may shear force, may moment. So hindi zero. So yan yung maging conjugate beam nung letter J. Okay? So that is how we identify the conjugate beam of any given real beam. So again, I don't want you to memorize the corresponding conjugate beams of those different real beams. I want you to understand how we come up with those conjugate beams based from the real beam. Again, ang real beam, theta and slope. Slope and deflection ang kukunin mo. The slope and deflection of the real beam corresponds to the shear and moment of the conjugate beam. So yun yung pagtutugmay mo. Slope, deflection ng real beam corresponds to the shear and moment of the conjugate beam. So magka-connect silang dalawa. Yung slope, shear, okay? Yung deflection, yun yung moment. Okay, so I hope you understand or you have learned somehow the concepts of conjugate beam. In the following video, I'll be showing you solutions on solved problems. Okay, so